Everybody loves a good brisket. When cooked correctly, it's tender, juicy, and mouth-watering good. So today, we're gonna be wet brining a brisket for 72 hours in buttermilk to see if we can create the most juicy, tender bite of brisket possible. Let's get into it. Today we're using an Australian Cape Grim brisket, which is some of the highest quality meat that you can get here in Australia. But before we can submerge her, we've got to trim her up. Because right now, she ain't even gonna fit in our container. When trimming up a brisket, you wanna try and remove big chunks of external fat because it's not going to render down and it's gonna prevent that bark from forming on the outside. And with our brisket all trimmed up, it's time to submerge this bad boy. That is a perfect fit. The base to our tenderizing brine is buttermilk. Buttermilk contains lactic acid, which I'm hoping is going to help break down the muscle fibers and connective tissues, leading to a tenderer brisket. Tenderer, more tender. That's better English. In addition to that, we're also adding salt, apple cider vinegar, and brown sugar. Each of these are either gonna make the meat more tender or help retain as much moisture as possible through the brining process. And with that out of the way, this little baby's going in the fridge for 72 hours.
3 days later.
We're ready to take a look at our brisket. Not gonna lie, I'm actually kind of nervous. I have no idea what to expect. This thing looks crazy. After patting down as much of the excess buttermilk as possible, you could see that it had definitely been at work. It felt like a regular brisket, but the outside had turned completely pale white and had a faint sour odor. I was really curious to know just how far the buttermilk had penetrated through the tissue. For seasoning, as always with a brisket, we're keeping it as simple as possible. We want to enhance the flavor of the beef, not add to it. So we're going with SPG. And with Frankenstein steak all seasoned up, let's get her on the kettle. And while we wait all day for our brisket to cook, I mean, we've got like 12 plus hours. Let's get into some sides. Today we're making cast iron honey cornbread. Starting off with our dry ingredients, we have 1.5 cups of flour. I'm using 00, but all purpose will work just fine. 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And for our wet ingredients, we're starting off with 3 eggs, 1.5 cups of milk, 2/3 a cup of honey, and 125 grams of melted butter. Give that a mix wet into dry, and another hard mix until you've got your batter. Into the cast iron, then into the oven at 190 for 25 minutes before finishing off with a glaze of honey. This smells absolutely delicious. Soft, fluffy and pillowy honey cornbread. After 9 hours, our brisket hit the stalling point, so it was time to give it the good old foil boat. The foil boat's going to allow us to speed up the cooking process, get out of that stall while allowing the juices at the bottom to be caught, keeping the bottom nice and juicy, but also keep the top bark nice and hard because it's exposed. And 15 long hours later, this is what we're left with. But we're not done just yet, we still need to let it rest. The bigger a piece of meat, the longer you're going to want it to rest. For something like a brisket, 5, 6, 7, 8 kilos sometimes, you're going to want to rest this minimum 2 hours, but the longer the better. And because we want the best chances of this being as tender as possible for this experiment, we're resting it overnight.
Tomorrow.
Now I'm just going to be quiet for a minute and let you enjoy what's on screen. Alright, welcome to the taste test. It's finally time to see whether brining a brisket in buttermilk is actually going to make it more tender. Now this is a piece from the point end of the brisket. Delicious. Wow. Now the point end is always super tender and super juicy, so I think it's going to be hard to tell whether or not it made a big difference. So I think our theory is really going to be put to the test over here. And another thing, no funny flavor. I'm not getting any hint of buttermilk at all. And of course, we've got to try a little bit with our bread. Bread, brisket. Out of this world. Oh, yummy, hey? I think brisket is Mochi's favorite food. All right, so before we close off this video, is it worth wet brining a brisket in buttermilk for 72 hours to make it more tender? I'm gonna say it again, with the point end, I didn't see too much of a difference. This is always tender, always juicy, but this flat, apart from the Wagyu brisket that I cooked a couple weeks ago, is the most tender and juicy flat I have ever made. I'm gonna say that it's plausible, there might be something to this. But hey, don't take my word for it, give it a go yourself and see how it makes your brisket turn out. That's all for this video, guys. Comment down below what you might want to see me try next. Like the video, share it to all your friends and family, and happy barbecuing.